Let me this out. Okay. Uh, Crap. Let me see something here. Hello? There goes all of my viewership. But I'm back. I'm online. Let me tweet it out. Give me 1 second. Let me tweet it out, guys. Give me one moment here. Sorry about that. Internet has been super unstable recently, and yeah, it is foot suck. Puppy Duck, thank you so much for the super chat. I just see. I wanted to signal boost Nick's point. I think that FF16 and Rebirth together in the same physical year really had series seems to have split fans. I love how you observe that they, the CBUs, were not sharing notes. Yeah, for sure, man. Absolutely. There isn't really like a unified vision, and I think that's kind of the problem. Internet crashed, but we're back. Okay, there we go. And I had... There we go. Okay. I think I had privated the last stream, but I don't think that there is a need to do that. But I'll fix that later. I only did it because I was like, well, that stream's a dud, but I'll just fix it. I'll relist it or whatever, that first half of the stream. Anyway, we're back. Let me make sure that the YouTube link is reposted here so that everyone knows that we're back. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. For a bit of context here, what happened is that in Texas the other day, we had a terrible, awful storm. And this storm tore everything up. You may hear an echo of me for a second. We had a terrible storm, and this storm tore everything up, and power lines are down. Over 1 million people in Texas without power. It is pretty horrendous, but we're back now. And yeah, they're doing like a lot of maintenance on internet and stuff like that. And so unfortunately, it's just been a tough situation here where you know, they're trying to fix the internet, fix people's power, and it has resulted in some nightmarish crap happening with internet and other stuff. But anyway, we are back, and I don't know what we were talking about before. Let me get myself situated here with some of my stuff. But how does it feel that you made a hit tweet? Making a hit tweet sucks, I think, actually. Making a hit tweet is not great in my experiences. Making a hit tweet means that you attract a ton of people who want to challenge you on your hit tweet. So, thank God you came back, man. I'm glad to be back. I'm sorry that I disappeared for a little while there. But yeah, internet issues because of how terrible because of how terrible the storm was here. And now we're not dealing with that storm anymore, but we're dealing with the aftermath. So, we were talking about Ever Crisis. What do you think of the young Sephiroth? Because I still haven't really even watched it, honestly. But being completely honest, because I was just like, oh boy. I still have to actually like dive into it. It seemed really interesting. I only saw like some of the Twitter discourse on it about how the cloud is like making Sephiroth's wing. That's kind of like the thing that I imagine. What's your plan after you hit 100K subscribers on YouTube? Plan? My plan is I don't know. The journey to 100K has been a long one. I think mostly because like in the past year or so, it's actually been like one of the hardest years of growth, and now I'm growing again, right? And so I wasn't really for a longer period of time before. I was struggling to grow, and it sucked. But now I feel like we're back. I feel like we've been really making growth here on the channel, and it's been really good. I'm really thankful to you guys for making that happen. Usually hit tweets are deserved, especially if it's just parroted bad takes. Yeah, exactly. um, so that's kind of the thing, right? Is that a lot of the times when you have a hit tweet kind of feels bad, at least in my experience, because sometimes I feel like to have a hit tweet, you almost have to like lay out a very flat opinion, and then you have to go back and then explain that flat opinion, and uh, it sucks. But yeah, a lot of the times there's more nuance that you want to include, but including that nuance drags down the tweet, and Twitter doesn't necessarily praise nuance. It praises you saying something that leans into something or leans into an idea, right? And you guys know me, and you know that I don't really lean into stuff in that way. I don't really, most ideas I have are very, like, very nuanced and have, they're not like, I don't know how to explain it, but you get what I mean, right? Do you think FF7 Remake should come out on Xbox Series X? I think it should come out on every platform ever. I think it should come out on like Nokia Engage if it can. Making a hit tweet and then muting is good for followers, but then you get a lot of people outside your circle who don't understand your POV. Yeah, that's kind of the thing, right? Is that not everyone in the world is going to know my POV and all the nuances of every thought that I ever had. Right? And you know, that's even the case with like a lot of your followers too, right? Like not everyone who follows you even really necessarily knows what you believe on every single thing. And so, you know, there's always that issue of um, you know, not everyone knows what the F I'm talking about. And so in the long run, this game will be on everything. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's kind of the nature of like games in general, I feel, right? Is that eventually a game ends up on everything, right? Like eventually every single platform that could, I mean, look at Final Fantasy VII PS1, right? PS1 game eventually became playable on every single piece of hardware. Ravings in, thank you. I love your videos despite what people say. Hold on. Despite what people say. What do they say? What do they say? Despite what people say. What do they say? Oh no. Oh no. Thanks, I think. Just kidding. Okay, good deal. Good deal. Fair enough. Yeah, I don't care about your thoughts or feelings, NSP. I just watch your videos because I think you're hot, but I really do love your FF content. Thank you. I appreciate that. Actually, you know what? I could take that like pretty well. Like honestly, that's like I could still like vibe with that like pretty hard. Like someone saying everything you say is like really stupid. Like profoundly stupid. But but you're kind of handsome and have a nice jawline. So I don't really mind. Isn't it kind of funny that like human behavior, like the way we perceive things, even kind of like works like that in the first place? That we'd still be like, or maybe I'm just a narcissist. But yeah, I would still be like, yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm cool with that. The Josie, thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you for a big one too. Holy crap, thank you. I feel like Capcom has been amazing, listening to their fans and have increased their following in an amazing way. What do you think Square Enix truly needs in order to create that level of trust with the fan base? Well, first of all, again, thank you for the super chat. I think you're right. I think you're right. Capcom also had their arc too, where they kind of destroyed, you know, a sense of trust with their fan base, and then Capcom also was able to get it all back. I think what made Capcom able to get it all back and then some to the point of where Capcom is so revered in the industry now is that I think they consistently put out games that were really universally praised. And there seems to be a quality measure that is happening with Capcom games that doesn't feel like it's happening with Square Enix games. To be specific, I think that Square Enix has released Babylon's Fall published. I think they've, developed and released Avengers. I think that they've put out all of these titles that were clear cash grabs and weren't good titles. I think they put out a bunch of stuff and no one was interested in all of that stuff. And the problem is that they just kept putting it out. And I think that if they had more quality control and if they consistently put out great games and didn't have all of these flops and attempts at things that they shouldn't be attempting, then they would have that reputation back. I mean, that's the reputation that Squaresoft had, and that's not to say that Rebirth was bad. Obviously, I don't think Rebirth was bad. I loved Rebirth, or 16 was necessarily bad either. But it is to say that they need to have their entire company putting out very consistent level of quality of games. And I think that's the delta, is to keep putting out good games and to put them out in perpetuity for a long stretch of time. And I think that's what Squaresoft did, right? I think that's why we love Squaresoft. And I think if they're able to do that, then they will have all of the trust that they had back, and then even way more. I think that's it. It really just comes down to making great games, marketing those great games too, which the marketing on some of their titles has been a little shaky. But I do think that if they do that, then yeah. So I think that's what it all comes down to, right? Like I think even like a better question would be, how did Square lose that kind of faith um in the first place? And a lot of that loss of faith really came from producing games like, you know, let me not name games because there are some people who are still fans of those games regardless, but yeah, I think they produced a lot of games that were super divisive and a lot of fans couldn't get behind. And they also produced a lot of games that, fans just don't care about. And I think ultimately, uh, that is just what it comes down to. I think if you make good games, people come, and I think if you don't, they don't, right? Not always, right? Because we do have some exceptions where you can make a fantastic game and still not enough people show up. I think that Rebirth is kind of an example of that. A game that I think is phenomenal and still, unfortunately, didn't do anywhere near what it should have done. Speaking of the hyper-realism graphics and art style glazing discourse, yeah, we all know art style tends to age more gracefully, but let's not pretend they ain't cheap or nor easy to pull off. And like I said, you can have stellar graphics and art direction. Look at FF7 Remake or Alan Wake 2. The last one had a pretty modest budget compared to other games, so IDK. Yeah, and that's actually the sad part too, is that even Alan Wake 2 didn't make all of its money back, you know? I think Alan Wake 2 is not profitable yet, which is insane. I think if anything is like, yeah, I know. Like from like what I understand is that Remedy is like kind of struggling actually. Not like struggling, but they haven't like really recouped their cost yet. Yeah, Alan Wake hasn't managed to recoup its development budget yet, though. So, according to the latest report, even with a modest budget, it can contain risk, right? So, I mean, that's kind of that's the issue. Um, it's like it's tough. It's tough. I don't know. I don't know what the secret is to making games really work nowadays. Amelia, oh my gosh, thank you so much for the tier one. How you been? Thanks for joining us today. Hope you've been doing well. I mean, Rebirth looks good, but the story and remake scares me, so I'm waiting for part three. Right. It's actually very interesting. You know, speaking of comments, on the last couple of videos where I've been talking about Jacob Novik's Twitter thread, there has been a lot of disingenuous. I mean, there's always disingenuous discourse on some stuff, but like I was reading it, and people were talking about turn-based combat, and they were like, the reason the game didn't sell well is because it wasn't turn-based, and I'm just like, it's got nothing to do with it. Um, honestly, I don't even, necessarily speaking, I don't think that's necessarily that you can't make a turn-based game sell good anymore anyway. I just think that, like, I think you can, actually. And Baldur's Gate 3 is proof of that. But I don't think that it's, like, relevant to the way these games performed. Right? Mostly because I don't think that there's that many turn-based purists in the world to really care. Who really care that deeply about it being turn-based or not, right? I don't think BG3 sold well because it was turn-based. The reason yeah, yeah. And that's kind of the point, is that I think that you can make a turn-based game sell well, but it's usually not predicated on the fact that it's turn-based, if that makes sense, right? Like, there is a turn-based audience, but I don't think that, like, the mainstream is like, oh, it's turn-based. This is exactly the type of thing that I'm looking for. I think that a lot of people buy it regardless if it's turn-based, and not like ultra specifically because something is turn-based, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think that, like, right, like BG3 wouldn't have worked as an action game, right? I completely agree. But it's the type of game that BG3 is that it was. I think that if you polled everyone who played BG3 and like why they bought it, it's because of the role playing, and I think that the role playing is enhanced by the turn-based combat, but I don't think that tactical turn-based combat is like why most people bought BG3. Right? Like I think if you like you ran through the data and you were like, why did people buy BG3? I feel like it probably would not be turn-based. BG3 sold on memes like things with certain bears. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that is how it went viral, right? Like, it's not like people saw like an awesome clip of the turn-based combat and went like, "Oh my god, it's turn-based. Let's go," and like freaked out, right? So I think that's actually kind of the nuance of the situation, that people don't care that it's turn-based. They care that it's a good game, and like basically turn-based is not a deterrent, but I don't think that it attracts most people, if that makes sense. It doesn't make people usually not buy the game, but it's not like a selling point, typically, I think. But also too, the Dungeon and Dragons community, like you said, yeah, is really huge. And that's an audience that's into turn-based because Dungeons and Dragons is turn-based, so I think it works. So I think you can have a multi-million hit that's turn-based, but I think that the combat alone is probably not going to be the grand reason that a turn-based game ends up selling as much as it does, right? I still don't think it's fair to say Rebirth sold badly. I think the expectations are too bloated. Well, um, if you do the math based on the estimates, it probably hasn't made its money back yet. So I think that's actually the issue. I think it will, but I think from my understanding, the issue is that we still haven't that it still hasn't made most of its money back yet, or barely broken even. Which seems to be the issue from my understanding. Not that it's not just like not profiting to an insane degree. I may be wrong on that, and I think it may have broken even finally at some point, but and I think that as time will go on, it'll make all of its money back. But like that seems to be my understanding of the situation currently based on what I have read. It's ludicrous that it cost. It is ludicrous that it cost that much. I don't disagree whatsoever. Um, to me, that's the ultimate issue, right? I think anything should be able to sell like 1 million copies, or at the very most like 2 million copies, and break even, right? So I think that there is an issue if a game can sell 2 million copies and it's considered like a failure. To me, something is like going on there. And whether it's, whether it's the budget or whether it's the price of the game, whether we need to charge more than $70 for games, which I know is an incredibly touchy subject, then yeah. But I think that there's a fundamental issue happening, if we can have games be sell like 2 million plus copies, and then that's still like, we didn't make our money back, right? Again, I brought it up like 3,000 times now, but it really does all just go back to how eye-opening that Spider-Man 2 really was. And obviously, not every game is going to have like Spider-Man 2's numbers behind the scenes. But it just goes to show that that's like kind of the risk that AAA devs are willing to take on these types of titles, where they're like, yeah, we'll just have to sell 7 million copies of a thing and it'll be okay to spend this much. Right? Like, it's kind of insane that that's even approved. Like the fact that like, oh yeah, dude, it's okay. We'll definitely sell 7 million copies. But like that's just like what the crap, right? And also too, like the kind of issue is that how do you make a new IP then, right? Because if you're making a new IP, you're not going to spend Spider-Man 2 budget or God of War budget, right? Because with a new IP, that's even more risky because you don't even know if people like this thing that much, right? You don't know how people are going to respond to it. So then when it comes to making new IP, what you do is you make the safest title that you could possibly make, right? Which is, something vaguely third person action with a parry mechanic and a movie like stuff. And not to say those things are bad. I generally like those types of games, probably the most. But it is to say that you don't go out of a certain spectrum of type of game that you can make. Because if you do, then it's kind of like, well, that's a wrap. You spend Stellar Blade sells barely a million, still considered a W. Yeah. Shift Up seems to be pretty happy with Stellar Blade, so that's good. I imagine that Stellar Blade is closer to 2 million maybe now. I would hope, but yeah. 17 needs to recycle assets from 7R 16. It's really difficult, right? Like, how can 17 recycle assets when seventeen's world is going to be so fundamentally different, right? We assume. So there isn't even much they can honestly recycle, at least I imagine. Maybe like rocks, grass textures. But like there's not like a tremendous amount that they could. I think that like where the kind of like recycling comes in is probably more like using a lot of ideas and code again to make a firm Final Fantasy formula so that people know what kind of game they're going to get into. I know that there are some people that prefer the more modern approach where each title is basically a brand new IP and has almost nothing in common with the last one. Um, because Final Fantasy's always been an anthology series, but it didn't necessarily reboot gameplay every single time. Before that's a more recent development. And so I think that it is actually very difficult to have a brand where the brand could just be literally anything. I do think that Final Fantasy needs to be something. I don't think it needs to be so well defined that it loses Final Fantasy because obviously the magic of FF to a large degree is that it can take any form, right? And it's ever changing. But I think that there is a middle ground between that and not having a not having it just be a random thing every time. Firm Final Fantasy. I think I seen that one on. Yeah, that's. um. Do you think that Square Enix will combine all three parts of Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy into one whole game with extra content for PlayStation 6? I think it's actually too difficult for them to combine it into one whole game. I think Hamaguchi was asked about that, and he said that because they're different game balances and different, basically they're different self-contained games, and it would actually be incredibly hard, incredibly huge technical challenge. Um, I think if they could make that work though, it wouldn't be a terrible idea. Like if they could combine it all into one thing. Um, like for a re-release. Yeah, it'd be like the biggest game ever. But if they could do that in a re-release, that could be like another way to recoup the costs of making the trilogy. I just find it hard to imagine how FF can reach the younger audience that grows up with live service free to play games. I'm afraid that the 50 plus hour double A single player game is yeah, yeah. I mean that's the thing, right? Is that I oftentimes think of my nephew when I'm understanding this stuff as kind of the average Gen Z, Gen Alpha. He might technically be Gen Alpha gamer. I think he's technically Gen Alpha. Whatever. He's like 13 or 14. I forget. Um, but I look at him and I see the way he games and how fundamentally different it is from me growing up, right? And I mentioned this in the video, but like every time I wanted a new game, I had to go ask mom. Like there was no such thing as a game that I could play online all the time with my friends. It was called RuneScape, but I didn't play that. I mean, I did for like a couple weeks. I wasn't knee deep into it, but that was it, right? There wasn't like a wealth of these free to play games, right? Nowadays, though, there are so many service games that you can start playing right now for free. Oftentimes in this conversation, I'm surprised that League of Legends isn't mentioned because I feel like that's actually a very big one. Like I know plenty of people who I feel like that was actually like the first really big service game, maybe. I mean, other than like an MMO, like like a World of Warcraft or something. I feel like other than that, League was like maybe like one of the first really huge service games right there with like Minecraft and stuff. Honestly, if Nintendo, sorry, I'm a little congested. If Nintendo ever made a service Smash Bros, because I'm thinking about multiverses. But if Nintendo ever made a service Smash, that thing would do numbers. But I don't think they ever would because I think that Nintendo is anti-service game. And that is something that I really respect about Nintendo. So I've really come around to kind of having a lot of respect for Nintendo in a lot of ways recently. Um, I'm not like a huge Nintendo guy because I feel like Nintendo makes so many anti-consumer and anti-industry moves. But I do think that, sorry, allergies going crazy. I do think that there are some things that Nintendo does that I'm like, thank you, Nintendo, because if you didn't do it, the whole industry would do it. And Nintendo, for example, has been really anti-service game. Nintendo also has been really against the Game Pass situation. And I think Nintendo is so smart for this because the problem I have with subscriptions like Game Pass is that once you condition the consumer to no longer need to pay full price to get games, they will never do that shit again. Right? Like once you teach people they don't need to pay for stuff, they aren't going to do it. They will want it to be included in their subscription forever. And that is a terrible way to have this industry ran. For starters, it means the idea that like it kind of kills self-publishing, right? Because it's like, I don't know, would you pay like, I mean, maybe some of you would, like really like movie enthusiasts, but like you wouldn't go pay for like movies nowadays. Most people wouldn't. Most people would just be like, oh, I'll wait for it to come onto Netflix. Vast majority, right? Sorry, fucking allergies. But most people will just, yeah, so most people will just wait for it to come to Game Pass. Just like people wait for stuff to come to Netflix so that they can watch it. Versus like, because most movies nowadays you can watch day one at home, a lot of them, and you just have to pay. But most people aren't going to do that. Like, most people will go to the theater because the theater is an event. And so I think that once you teach consumers that video games should all be part of a subscription and you shouldn't have to pay for them, they'll never do it again. And once that happens, it's like it's over. And also the idea of owning games is completely gone once that happens, right? Because you won't own games anymore. That idea will be completely gone. And I have a different perspective on video game ownership than what you'll hear from most other content creators, because most other content creators will say that the only road to ownership of games is to own physical games. And I think that owning physical games is only like one part of that equation. I think that like what actually needs to happen for people to own video games is for us to have DRM free digital and not just rely on physical games, because I think that if you buy a purchase digitally, you should still own that purchase. I think that if you buy anything, period, you should own it. And I don't think that purely physical ownership is the way to do that. I personally think legislation will catch up to that one. Right, exactly. And the only way to do that is to have legislation, is to have law. If it happens, it'll be in the European Union first, 100%. It will not happen in America first. But if it does happen, if it happens in the European Union, then it'll have to happen in the US, because they'll have to create the infrastructure, right? And then people in the US will start to demand it. So if the European Union can get that ball rolling, yeah. You own physical copies, but what if there's updates that require the game to work, get fucked? Yeah, I mean, and not even that. Like updates that require the game to work, DLC, all these other things that isn't guaranteed by owning a physical copy. And also, not to mention, there is a vast library of games that never receive a physical version anymore, right? And you're still paying for those games that don't have a physical version. I think that you have a right to still own those games, whether there's a physical disc or not. And so I think that the future is more than just the option to have a physical disc. I think that the future of media ownership is the ability to own your digital content DRM free. And for those who don't really understand what I mean by that, or what it means to be DRM free, is that GOG is a store that I support 100% of the way, right? So when you have DRM free, like GOG does, DRM free means that if I want to take this game, install it on a friend's computer, if I want to burn 20 discs that have a copy of this game, I can do that. And not only can I do that, I don't have to connect online to any servers, because I own this game. So an example of something you can do on GOG, for example, is that if I wanted to, I can buy a game, I can log in on my account. And once I'm logged in on my account, I can download a game and install it on a friend's computer. I can then delete my account from my friend's computer, and my friend will still be able to open that game, even though my account is no longer connected. With GOG, the only thing is that you can't receive updates, so you can't download patches, which is totally fair. But I can install that game on a friend's computer, and that's it. You know why I can do that? Because on GOG, it's DRM free, which means I actually own the game. I can make, if you believe in physical, if you still believe in physical with that, like 100% of the way, well, with GOG, you can make 20 copies. You can make 20 copies of the game you own. If you want to, you can make 20 copies of it. And guess what? No one can do anything. No one can say a word to you. And it will completely run because that is your DRM free game. So, that is why I'm a big believer in DRM free digital, because that to me sounds more like true ownership in the way that I personally would define ownership of a piece of media than even what physical can offer. That's why I'm pro DRM free. Like that's actual, that's what sounds like actual ownership to me. And that's what I think that ownership should actually look like of media. Not to say that, you know, that they shouldn't, that they should just stop making physical discs, but because I believe it's good for customers to have options. But did GOG charge 30% from the devs though? I actually don't know what they charge devs. Most stores do charge 30%. The only store that does not charge 30% is Epic. Epic only charges 12%. That's why all of these developers are like, ooh, we need to put this on Epic. That's why, right? Like, a lot of people assume that it's just paid Epic Game Store exclusivity deals, and those do happen. For sure. But a lot of it just comes down to the fact that like 1/3 of your money when you buy on Steam goes to Gabe and not to the developer. And it's like that on PSN and Xbox. Yeah, and it gets even better, you know, for Epic as well, because also with Epic, if you develop your game on Unreal Engine and you use the Epic Game Store, you don't have to pay any Unreal Engine royalties on games sold on the Epic Game Store. So you save even more money. So, objectively speaking, right? Like if you buy a game on Steam for $70, I think they say like after everything, the developer gets like 40, right? But if you buy a game on Epic, after everything, the developer gets like 55. So the developer is literally making like $15 more per purchase on you buying from Epic versus you buying from Steam. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to be clear. I like Steam. I do. And like when it comes down to it, I strongly prefer Steam's ecosystem to Epic's. It's just better. Part of that's because Steam's been there longer, and I'm more invested in Steam, and I have a Steam Deck, which makes having those games on Steam easier. So I have a preference for owning stuff on Steam from a customer perspective because it's just easier. What I want is for Steam to reconsider its royalty share and not make it so obnoxious like 30%. And I think that not only do I want Steam to do that, I also want that for PlayStation Network and for Xbox and for all of these, because I just think that when it comes down to it, you know, it makes more sense. Steam has a ton of features though for devs that make that 30% like better, like early access, wish listing, etc. Yeah, I know. And not only that, you have a bigger install base on Steam, which also makes it better. Your game is going to sell more on Steam and probably be more profitable on Steam, despite Steam's cut being obnoxious, because there's just more people buying on Steam at the end of the day. And that's just what it comes down to. People hate the Epic Game Store. And I get it. I do. A lot of people aren't fans of it, but I don't think actually having competition in terms of the launchers is bad. If you guys go and look at like the history of some of the things that Steam has done in response to Epic Game Store pressure, it actually made Steam a better service. So what's your feelings on Ever Crisis in light of your video about live service trending and SE using Ever Crisis to implement ideas that they may not have? I think that Square's always been good at stuff like Ever Crisis, those types of gachas, but I think what's really trending right now, like what they really need to do, is that AAA gachas are kind of the new move. So, Woowa. Is it? I haven't actually heard anyone pronounce it yet because I haven't watched any content. Is it Wuthering Wave or Weathering Wave? Wuthering? I don't know. Genshin. Fortnite, really. There's this new AAA. There's this new AAA gacha. Honkai. Right, yeah, there's AAA gachas now. AAA service games. And I do think that in comparison to those games, Square Enix does not have any service game that is like that. I don't even think FF14 really stacks up. Oh, it is Wuthering? Okay. I was saying it like Weathering in my head, but I hadn't actually watched any content on it, so I didn't know how anyone pronounced it. And I downloaded the game last night, and I still haven't started on it. Genshinify Final Fantasy. I'm not saying that they should like make FF17 like a gacha. I do think that there is a need for like a Square Enix Genshin competitor. Like I've thought that for a long time. Like I've thought there should be a Square Enix Genshin competitor for a minute. Like I've thought that for quite some time. And not because that's like necessarily the exact thing I want to play, but just because like I just think it makes the most amount of sense. Like business wise. It's not the artist in me that would make that decision. It's the guy looking at what I would do to make money. And when I say like, should the SE gacha also be a new IP? That's a difficult question, right? Because there is part of me that thinks they should trend chase and just make it like something that looks like Genshin, right? And be a new IP. There's also an advantage to just calling it Final Fantasy too. I don't think it'd be a bad... Actually, it may not be a bad idea to call it Final Fantasy. I think actually calling it Final Fantasy would... If you call it Final Fantasy at the very least, and you have like 40 million downloads, you now have people who will go check out Final Fantasy stuff. You understand? Like, those people would go play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Right? Like, I think if you had Genshin Impact and then you also had like $70 Hoyoverse games that people could go buy, if people like played Genshin and then there was like, oh, there's like a single player Genshin thing I can go buy, I think they would do that. But should the gameplay be something like Genshin? An action RPG? Yeah. I do think so. I mean, or it could be turn-based. I think Hoyo does. I mean, Honkai does pretty well. I don't think Honkai does anywhere near as much as Genshin. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think Genshin is still like the massive one, exponentially so over Honkai. If I'm not mistaken, someone correct me on that, please, if I'm wrong. Problem is, SE has created such a stigma with themselves in the gacha community with closing down so many. That's also another thing too. Honkai is still number 2 of all gachas, though, right? I do think that action would probably be like a little bit maybe like of an easier sell. I think Honkai kind of had the benefit of being from the creators of Genshin, right? Like to like really sell it, but I just hope Square Enix wouldn't have to come to this just to have money. I don't know. I don't really have a favorite waifu in any gacha. I don't know. My favorite wife gacha waifu is like every girl in Near Reincarnation. I didn't even play it, but I saw all the designs. So my answer is every single design in that game. Which every single design in that game was pretty damn good, actually. So turn-based isn't what sells Honkai Star Rail now. Yeah, I mean that's the thing that kind of like goes back to like what I was saying is that like I don't think turn-based is like a hard turn off, but I don't think it like makes people go and like purchase it like right away. Like I don't think turn-based is like a marketing bullet point for people outside of a more niche JRPG community. I think once you go into the mainstream, that most mainstream people aren't going to be like, oh, turn-based. That's like a bullet point. In the same way that like open world is, right? But guess what is a bullet point? Action, right? Like if a game is open world or action, like the first thing that you see about the game when you read any marketing material is that this open world action RPG, right? How often do you see that string of words? Anytime it can be remotely applicable, that string of words will be said as like the first things to describe the game. Even though all of those games within that genre can have like a lot of diversity, right? Like they will always put up front, it's an open world action RPG because those are really strong marketing bullet points in a way that I don't think that like necessarily that turn based would be. Okay, I think we're actually going to officially end this stream there. I'm sorry that I had the technical issues earlier, but we are going to be back tomorrow. We're going to be back tomorrow with the Sony State of Play. There is a State of Play tomorrow. Be there. For those of you on YouTube, you can go and make sure you can hit that notify button. Hit the notify button, and that'll let you know the moment I go live. I'll be doing a pre-show. Midnight Sapphire, I think I'm going to be starting at 3 p.m. Central. So convert that to your local time zone. Yes, it's also Baby Seal's birthday tomorrow. So wish him a happy birthday. Actually, you can wish him one right now if you're on Twitch because we're going to rate him. All right, guys, I love you. I'm headed to the gym, and I will see you all next time. Later.